The night the storm rolled in, something in the air felt strange, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for a moment none of them expected. Cassian Rowe noticed it first. He always did. Even in a crowded place, even in the noise of life, he sensed shifts the way others sensed temperature. But that night, it wasn't the weather he felt, it was her. He had stepped into the quiet little cafe on Alder Street to shelter from the wind, brushing raindrops from his jacket, when his eyes lifted and stopped. Across the room, behind the counter, stood a woman he had never seen before, a woman who looked up at the exact same moment he did. And when their eyes met, the world went still. Not dramatic, not loud, just still. As if every sound softened, every light dimmed, every heartbeat shifted into a different rhythm altogether. Her name, he later learned, was Celine Harrow. But in that suspended second, she was simply the stranger with the quiet gaze that held a warmth he didn't understand. Celine blinked once, almost like she was startled to find someone looking at her in the same unguarded way she was looking at him. She stood frozen with her hand hovering above a stack of cups, as if she forgot what she was reaching for. The cafe wasn't busy, but the soft hum of conversation wrapped gently around them. A couple near the window whispered over their mugs. An elderly man read a newspaper at the corner table. The barista next to Celine was humming quietly as she wiped the espresso machine. Everything was normal, except the two of them. Cassian swallowed, unsure why his chest suddenly felt too tight. He wasn't the type to believe in instant connections. He didn't buy into destiny or cosmic timing or any of that. Life had taught him to stay grounded, to keep expectations low and heart steady. And yet, he couldn't look away. Celine moved first. She dropped her gaze, a faint, shy smile brushing over her lips as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft enough that Cassian leaned in slightly without meaning to. "What can I get for you?" she asked. Simple words, ordinary words, but the way she said them felt anything but. He stepped forward, letting the warmth of the cafe settle over him. "Just a tea," he said, though he couldn't remember ever ordering tea in his life. He usually needed something stronger, darker, something to match the pace of his thoughts. But in that moment, matching her gentleness felt right. Celine nodded, still not meeting his eyes. "Any particular kind?" "Whatever you think fits the night," he replied, before he could stop himself. She finally looked up. Just like that, the stillness returned. Celine hesitated, searching his face as if trying to understand something she didn't have the words for. Then she turned and prepared a blend she didn't usually offer to customers. She placed the cup in front of him with both hands, her fingers brushing the edge just long enough to feel warm. Cassian paid, thanked her, and moved to an empty table near the far wall, but he didn't touch the tea. He just watched her, carefully, quietly, in a way most people didn't watch anything anymore. Celine pretended not to notice. She failed. Every few minutes, her eyes drifted toward him, only for her to snap them away quickly, cheeks coloring faintly each time. It was a simple beginning, but something about it felt significant, like the first page of a story neither of them knew they were stepping into. Rain kept tapping the windows. The lights flickered softly. Someone laughed near the front door. And as Cassian and Celine kept stealing glances they hoped the other didn't catch, an unspoken question formed in both of their minds. Why does this feel different? Neither had the answer, but they were both about to find out. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. As Cassian lifted the cup for the first time, Celine suddenly froze mid-step, staring at something or someone behind him, her expression shifting into something Cassian had never seen on her face before. Cassian felt the change before he understood it. Celine's expression, once soft and shy, tightened as she stared at something just beyond his shoulder. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but it was close enough that Cassian set his cup down without taking a sip. He turned slowly. A man stood by the door, brushing raindrops from a worn jacket. He wasn't imposing, but something in his posture carried the weight of a memory that hadn't healed properly. His dark eyes scanned the room until they landed on Celine, locking onto her with a familiarity that made Cassian's chest tighten for reasons he didn't want to examine. Celine stiffened. The man offered her a hesitant nod, as if unsure whether he had the right to approach. She responded with the smallest incline of her head before glancing quickly at Cassian, then away again. Whoever the man was, Celine clearly hadn't expected him. Cassian didn't know what he was supposed to feel. He wasn't jealous, he had no claim, no right, but the connection he'd felt the moment he walked in had been so sudden, so strange, that seeing it disrupted stirred something quiet and uneasy inside him. The man stepped toward the counter. Celine straightened, forcing her features into polite neutrality. "Evening, Orion," she said gently. Though her voice carried a tremor, Cassian wasn't sure anyone else would hear. Orion. A name with edges. A name that sounded like someone who had once mattered. "Didn't think you'd still be working this late," Orion replied, offering a strange smile. "The storm's getting worse." Celine nodded. "I can handle it." An awkward pause. A shared history thick enough that even strangers could sense it. Cassian looked down at his untouched tea, letting the moment pass without inserting himself. He wasn't here to interfere in someone else's story, but something nudged at him, the same instinct that had made him walk into this cafe instead of catching the next bus home. A few minutes later, Orion stepped aside to wait for his order. Celine turned back to Cassian, her eyes apologetic. "I'm sorry about that," she murmured. "You don't have to be," he said, offering a small smile. "Old friend?" She hesitated. Too long for the answer to be simple. "Something like that," she said quietly. Cassian nodded, not pushing, even though his curiosity tightened beneath his ribs. The room felt heavier now, filled with things unsaid. Celine wiped her hands on a towel, steadied herself, and leaned slightly closer to him. "Your tea is going to get cold," she whispered, almost playfully, almost as if trying to reclaim the lightness they'd shared moments before. He lifted the cup, finally tasting the blend she'd chosen. It was warm, soothing, with hints of citrus and something floral he couldn't name. It felt like a drink meant to settle storms, not start them. "It's good," Cassian said softly. Celine's shoulders eased. "I'm glad." But the calm didn't last long. Orion received his drink and lingered by the exit, glancing between Celine and Cassian with a look Cassian recognized immediately, confusion mixed with something deeper, something like regret. He finally opened the door, hesitated once more, and stepped back into the rain. Celine exhaled shakily when he disappeared from view. Cassian didn't want to intrude. He didn't want to read too much into a stranger's reaction, but the weight in Celine's eyes tugged at him, urging him to say something. "Are you okay?" he asked. Her breath caught. A soft, almost soundless laugh escaped her. "I haven't seen him in a long time." Cassian waited. "He was important to me," she continued. "We haven't spoken since a moment I wish we had handled differently." She didn't elaborate, and Cassian didn't ask. Some stories didn't want to be told all at once. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the windows. A customer hurried inside, dripping and muttering about the downpour, but even the noise couldn't break the fragile thread between Celine and Cassian. She looked at him with a vulnerability that seemed out of place for two people who'd just met. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," she whispered. Cassian smiled gently. "Maybe because sometimes it's easier to talk to someone who wasn't there." Celine opened her mouth as if to respond, but a sudden crash of thunder made the lights flicker. The cafe dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again. A hush fell over the room. Celine glanced at the ceiling with worry. If the power goes out, we might have to close early. The storm was growing worse, much worse. Cassian felt the shift again, the same strange sensation that had hit him the moment he first saw her. Something was building. Something neither of them understood yet. And as the room darkened once more, Celine slowly reached for the emergency lantern beneath the counter, pausing when she realized someone else in the cafe was watching her with an expression full of questions she wasn't ready to answer. The second flicker of the lights stretched longer than the first, long enough for people to murmur, shift uncomfortably, and glance toward the windows where wind hammered the glass with growing force. Celine knelt to take out the emergency lantern, her fingers trembling slightly. She wasn't afraid of storms, that much was clear. Her fear came from something else, something that had stepped into the cafe only minutes earlier, wearing a familiar jacket and a complicated past. Cassian watched her quietly, his hands wrapped around the warm mug, even though he wasn't drinking from it anymore. He didn't want to intrude, but he also didn't want her to feel alone in the dimming room. "You handle chaos well," he said gently. Celine looked up at him as she set the lantern on the counter, its soft glow filling the cafe with a warm, steady light. "You'd think so," she replied with a small smile, "but inside I'm all over the place." Cassian didn't push. He just watched her steady herself, watched her breathe through whatever invisible weight pressed against her chest. Around them, the few remaining customers settled at their tables, grateful for the lantern's calm glow. One couple resumed their conversation in hushed tones. The elderly man folded up his newspaper, muttering about how storms like these used to knock out power for days. The barista near the espresso machine fiddled with her phone, trying to find a signal. The room felt smaller now, quieter, more intimate. Celine brushed her hands on her apron and forced her gaze up. "I should probably close early," she murmured. "The weather's only getting worse." Cassian nodded. "I don't mind heading out if you need to lock up." She hesitated. The pause wasn't practical, it was emotional. Celine searched for the right words. "I didn't want tonight to feel rushed." Cassian's heartbeat softened. It doesn't have to. Her eyes met his again, and that same strange stillness from earlier returned, like the world was acknowledging them in some quiet, unspoken way. But before she could respond, the front door creaked open. A startled gust of wind swept inside, scattering napkins and sending a chill through the lone customers. A man hurried in, drenched from head to toe, pulling off a hood soaked in rainwater. The barista rushed over to help him. Celine turned, but something in her posture shifted, tense, alert, almost protective. The newcomer wasn't Orion, but Cassian understood instantly that Celine recognized him too. He was younger than Orion, with sharp features softened by exhaustion. He looked around the cafe with quiet desperation before spotting Celine behind the counter. Relief washed across his face. "Celine," he said breathlessly, "thank goodness, I was hoping you were still open." Cassian watched Celine closely. This time, the emotion flashing across her face wasn't fear. It was worry. She stepped closer. "Lior, what are you doing out in this storm?" Lior? Another name Cassian didn't expect. Another tie to a part of Celine's world he didn't know existed. "I came to find you," Lior said, catching his breath. "Orion stopped by my place earlier." Celine froze. Cassian didn't know these men, but he knew enough now to sense that whatever history lived between them, it wasn't simple. "Why?" Celine whispered. Lior ran a hand through his wet hair. "He said he needed to see you before the night ended, that he couldn't wait anymore." Cassian's pulse quickened. He had no place in this conversation, yet he couldn't look away. Celine's voice dropped. Lior, I don't want to reopen everything we left behind. Not tonight. Not anymore. He thinks you should, Lior insisted. He said letting things stay broken isn't fair to any of us. The cafe felt colder suddenly. Cassian felt it, the moment where connection becomes fragile, threatened by things buried deep. Celine exhaled shakily. I don't want to do this here, not in front of... Her eyes flicked toward Cassian. He didn't pretend not to notice. He didn't pretend he wasn't listening. He simply met her gaze with something steady, something reassuring. It's okay, he said softly. You don't owe me an explanation. But Celine shook her head, a small, trembling movement. It's not that, she whispered. It's that some stories don't stay in the past just because you close the door. A long rumble of thunder rolled overhead, deep enough to make the lantern tremble faintly. Lior took a step closer. Celine, you need to hear him out. Celine closed her eyes, shoulders tightening. And Cassian, despite having known her for less than an hour, felt an unexpected ache rise in his chest, because something told him this storm wasn't just outside, it was happening inside her, too. And the part that scared him most was realizing he wanted to help her weather it. The lantern's glow felt smaller than before, as if the room itself sensed the tension gathering in quiet waves around Celine. Cassian watched her stand there, framed by the soft light, torn between the storm outside and the storm walking into her life one person at a time. Lior's presence wasn't threatening, but it was urgent, too urgent for a night meant to be simple. Celine took a slow breath and placed both hands on the counter, grounding herself. Lior, she whispered, I don't want to reopen the past. I can't keep going back to the same places that hurt. Lior exchanged a look with Cassian, awkward, hesitant, but grateful in a quiet way. Cassian didn't look away. He wasn't here to compete. He wasn't here to claim anything. He was simply present. Celine, Lior said softly, he regrets everything, truly. Orion has been trying to reach you for weeks. When he saw you tonight, he didn't know how to approach. He panicked. Celine's eyes glimmered with something heavy, not tears, just the weight of a memory Cassian didn't know. That's not an excuse, she murmured. I know, Lior admitted, but he didn't want to lose his chance to make things right. Cassian felt himself holding his breath without realizing it. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This was history, alive, unresolved, and now colliding with the quiet moment he and Celine had started to create. And yet, Cassian didn't step back. Something kept him there, something he couldn't explain. Celine turned away and pressed a hand against her forehead. Why tonight? She breathed. Why now, after all this time? Because he saw you with someone, Lior said gently, and it reminded him that life doesn't wait forever. Cassian looked down, suddenly aware of the delicate thread between him and Celine, one that had formed without warning, without permission. Celine's cheeks warmed, not with embarrassment, but with a kind of startled emotion she didn't try to hide. Lior, she whispered, Cassian is just a customer. The words should have been simple. They weren't. Cassian heard the slight tremor, the quiet dishonesty wrapped inside the sentence, because even she knew their connection didn't fit into something as small as a transaction. Lior noticed it too. He didn't comment, but his expression softened. Celine, he said, I'm not here to judge. Neither is he. We all just want you to be okay. She swallowed hard, her fingers curling against the counter as thunder cracked outside. The cafe shook lightly, and the lights tried once more to flicker back to life, failing. The lantern glowed brighter now by comparison. Celine finally turned toward Cassian. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't expect any of this tonight. Cassian rose slowly from his seat. He didn't walk too close, just enough that she didn't have to lift her voice to speak to him. I know, he said softly, but you're not facing it alone. Celine looked surprised, almost relieved, and then troubled by that relief. You don't even know me, she murmured. Cassian held her gaze. Maybe not, but sometimes you don't need history to care about someone. Sometimes a moment is enough to tell you someone matters. Celine exhaled, a trembling breath that broke something fragile inside her composure. Leor stepped back, respectfully, giving them space. The wind outside howled again, a long, mournful sound that echoed through the cafe. The windows shuddered. A few customers whispered nervously. The elderly man began packing up his things to leave before the storm worsened. Celine hesitated, torn between practical concerns and the emotional tide rising around her. I should close up, she whispered. This storm isn't letting up. Cassian nodded. Then let me help. You don't have to, she replied. I know, he said. I want to. She searched his expression, looking for motives, for expectations, for anything that didn't feel gentle. She didn't find any. Finally, with a fragile smile, she said, "Thank you." Cassian moved to stack chairs and wipe tables while Celine guided the last remaining customers toward the door. Leor helped gather scattered napkins and reorganize the counter. For a moment, the three of them existed in a strange harmony, like distant planets drawn into the same orbit by a storm no one had anticipated. When the final customer stepped out, Celine locked the door and leaned her forehead briefly against the cool glass. Rain streaked down the window, blurring the shapes of passing headlights. Cassian stepped toward her, slow, careful. Celine? She lifted her head. But before she could speak, the power surged one last time, lights flashing bright, then dying completely. The lantern flickered. And for one suspended second, Celine stood in the soft, dim glow, looking at Cassian as if she was about to reveal something she'd been holding in for far too long. Something that might change everything. For a heartbeat, the cafe existed only in lantern night and silence. Celine stood near the window, her features soft yet shadowed, as if the truth she'd been avoiding all night had finally caught up to her. Cassian stayed still, not wanting to interrupt whatever she was gathering the courage to say. Leor waited a few paces away, quiet and watchful, knowing this moment wasn't his to shape. Outside, the storm raged with no intention of stopping, but inside, something gentler, yet far more complicated, hung in the air. Celine's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely more than a fragile breath. Cassian, you walked in tonight without knowing anything about me, and somehow that made it easier to breathe, easier than it's been in a long time. Cassian's chest tightened, but he didn't move. You don't have to explain what you're not ready to. She shook her head. I think I need to. Not for Orion, not for Leor, for me. Leor stepped back even further, giving her the space she needed. The lantern cast warm circles of light across the floor, turning the small cafe into a quiet shelter from every storm, outside and within. Celine took a slow breath. A while ago, the three of us, Orion, Leor, and I, were inseparable. We grew up in the same neighborhood, shared the same dreams. Thought nothing could shake us. She hesitated, staring at her hands. Then, one night, something small turned into something bigger, a misunderstanding that became a fracture, and instead of talking it out, we pulled away. She swallowed hard. Orion blamed himself. Leor tried to fix it. And I ran from all of it. Cassian absorbed every word, not with judgment, but with gentle patience. Celine forced a quiet laugh. I convinced myself I was protecting everyone, but all I did was make the silence heavier. Lior spoke softly, almost reluctantly. Celine, Orion isn't here to stir up old memories. He's here because he finally found the courage to say he's sorry. Celine's shoulders sagged. I know. I felt it the second he walked in. Then why didn't you talk to him? Lior asked gently. She looked at Cassian. The answer was right there in her eyes. Because tonight, something felt different, she whispered, and I didn't want the past to swallow it. Cassian's breath caught. He didn't say anything, not yet, but Celine must have seen the question in his expression because she stepped closer, almost reaching him before stopping herself. When our eyes met, she said softly, I felt something shift, something I didn't expect, something I wasn't prepared for. Her words settled between them like a rising warmth, quiet, steady, impossible to ignore. Cassian spoke carefully. Celine, I don't want to be the reason you run from anything. You don't owe me anything. She shook her head again, firmer this time. It's not about owing, it's about choosing, and tonight I don't want to keep choosing fear. Lior watched with a faint, hopeful smile, like someone witnessing the end of a long winter. The storm thundered once more, rattling the windows, but none of them flinched. Celine stepped even closer now, her voice almost trembling. I don't know what happens after tonight. I don't know if this moment leads anywhere. But for the first time in a long time, I want to find out. Cassian felt something open in his chest, soft and unexpected. So do I. Celine's breath unsteadied. Then stay, just for a little while, long enough for the storm to pass. Cassian nodded slowly. I'm not going anywhere. Relief washed over her face, gentle and real. Lior exhaled quietly, then reached for his damp jacket. I should head out, he said softly. Orion will want to know you're okay. Celine touched his arm. Thank you for coming, Lior. He smiled. You're not alone anymore. None of us are. Then he slipped into the rain, leaving the door to close with a soft thud. The cafe was silent again. Celine and Cassian stood near the lantern, its glow reflecting in their eyes. She whispered, almost afraid to break the moment, Cassian, do you ever feel like you meet someone at the exact moment you're supposed to? He held her gaze, steady and warm. I do now. Celine's lips curved into the smallest, most genuine smile he'd seen all night. Outside, the storm slowly began to ease. Wind softened, rain lightened, the thunder drifted farther away. And in that fragile calm, two people who had met by chance, on a night they were never meant to be in the same place, stood together at the start of something quiet, hopeful, and new. Their story didn't need certainty, it only needed courage. And on that midnight of confession, they found enough of it to take their first step forward, together.